This is a social studies lesson for third grade students. The TEK is 113.14b 4a. Geography. The student understands how humans adapt to variations in the physical environment. The student is expected to describe and explain variations in the physical environment, including climate, landforms, natural resources, and natural hazards. The objective is the student will be able to distinguish between the various types of landforms and climates of the physical environment with 100% accuracy.
Hello everyone, my name is Brianna McCain, and today we're going to be talking about all of the different features you can find in our physical environment. First, let's get started defining what our physical environment really is. I'm sure when you go outside, you can see lots of things like streets, cars, houses, and buildings. But while these are part of our physical environment, they're all things that have been man-made. So when I talk about the physical environment, what I'm talking about is things that you find in nature. It's things the earth makes naturally. So today, what we're going to be talking about is climate, landforms, natural resources, and natural hazards. But for most part, we're going to be talking about the climate and all of the different landforms you can find on Earth. So what exactly comes to mind when you hear the word climate? For most people, the word that comes to mind is weather, except weather and climate are actually two different things. Weather is what's happening outside any given day. So yesterday it could have been raining, today it might be sunny, and tomorrow it's going to be cloudy. Those are all weather experiences. Climate is the average of those weather experiences over many, many years. So for example, if I want to know what the climate of a certain area is, I take the different days of, let's say, 20 years. So there's 365 days in a year, times 20 years, that's 7,300 days. So I'm going to take the average of those 7,300 days, and that gives me the climate, which for our Laredo area is hot and dry. The climate of a certain area is determined by its distance from the equator. Now remember, the equator is the midline that divides the top and bottom half of the Earth. These halves are called hemispheres. So you have the northern hemisphere on top, and you have the southern hemisphere on the bottom. Now, the reason your distance from the equator determines what kind of climate you're going to have is because the sun hits the equator most directly for the longest part of the year. As you move away from the equator in both directions, it gets cooler because you're getting further away from the direct heat of the sun. So I'm sure you've noticed that we have some lines on either side of the equator running left to right. These are the lines of latitude. Each line of latitude has its own degree. So as you can see, the equator, which is the midline dividing the northern and southern hemispheres, is actually at 0 degrees. In the northern hemisphere, we have 0 degrees to 90 degrees north, and the N is what lets you know whether the latitude is on the north or south side. On the bottom half of the Earth, we have the southern hemisphere. It also runs from 0 degrees to 90 degrees south. Now remember what we said about the equator, how the sun hits the equator most directly. So in the areas closest to the equator, 0 degrees between 30 degrees north and 0 degrees between 30 degrees south, what do you think the climate is going to be like there? It's really hot and dry because it gets the majority of the sun for the most part of the year. Now, we also said that the further away from the equator you get, on either side in the northern and southern hemisphere, the cooler it gets. So between 60 degrees south and 90 degrees south, we have extremely, extremely cold climate. In the northern hemisphere, between 60 degrees north and 90 degrees north, we have also incredibly cold climate. Now, I'm sure you've noticed that we have a little space here between 30 degrees and 60 degrees north and 30 degrees and 60 degrees south. What do you think the climate is going to be like in these two areas, in these two hemispheres? Well, the climate is actually very mild. Why do you think it's so mild? Well, it's because we get a little bit of the heat coming from the equator's area, and we get a little bit of the cold that's coming from the north and south poles. When these two mix, it gives us a really nice, moderate climate.
Now, what are landforms? Landforms are all of the different features that the Earth has. Some of the landforms we'll be discussing are plains, deserts, mountains, hills, canyons, glaciers, wetlands, and bodies of water.
Plains are large areas of flat land that have very few trees, mountains, hills, or bushes. One of the most noticeable things about a plain is that it looks like it goes on forever. Now let's talk about deserts. When you think of a desert, you tend to think of it as a really hot and sandy area, kind of like the ones you typically see in movies. But there are actually 4 different kinds of deserts. The first kind of desert is hot and dry, there's a cold desert, there's a semi-arid desert, and there's a coastal desert. The one we're going to be talking about today is the hot and dry desert. Now, the characteristics of this type of desert are that it gets less than 10 inches of rain a year. That's very little rain. Now, some deserts can be sandy, while others can just be really compact rock with a few bushes here and there. But the main thing you need to remember is that they get less than 10 inches of rain per year. Now let's talk about mountains. Mountains are large, natural rises that come out of the Earth's surface. As you can see in the picture, they're usually very steep and jagged, and they meet at a peak. Now let's get the definition of a hill. A hill, like a mountain, is a natural rise that comes out of the Earth's surface. Unlike a mountain, though, hills are much rounder and less jagged. They are also not as steep or tall. An easy way to remember the difference between a mountain and a hill is a mountain you have to climb down. A hill, it's pretty safe to roll down. Canyons are very deep gorges or valleys in the Earth's surface. They formed over the course of thousands, maybe even millions of years. Water is a very powerful force. It naturally cuts away at rock. When the water was flowing through these rivers, it was naturally cutting away at the rock, gradually making it deeper and deeper and deeper. So what is a really common canyon that you can think of? For me, I think of the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon at its deepest is 6,000 feet down. That didn't happen overnight. Now, the Grand Canyon is also extremely long. It goes on for 227 miles. Now let's discuss glaciers. Glaciers are large bodies of compacted snow. Compacted snow is snow that has pressed together over the course of many, many years. Usually it takes over 100 years for one glacier to form. Now let's discuss wetlands. Let's break this word apart. The first part of the word is wet. So what do you think of when you hear the word wet? Water. Now the second half of the word is land. So we can tell just by the name, wetland has to do with land that is covered in water. Wetlands aren't usually very deep. They are saturated in water at or very near the surface of the soil. And saturated means to be completely soaked in. Now, the last landform that we're going to discuss as part of our physical environment is bodies of water. Bodies of water are large areas of earth that are covered in water. They are usually very deep, unlike wetlands, and they consist of things like oceans, seas, and lakes.
This is the end of my lesson. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned a lot about the different parts of our physical environment.